Welcome to another episode of Mission Compliance, Unleashing Growth Potential for Defense Contractors. Today we're diving into a hot topic in the world of IT infrastructure. Should you move your computers and servers to Azure Government? As defense contractors face increasing cybersecurity requirements, choosing the right cloud platform is more crucial than ever. Azure Government promises compliance, security, and scalability, but is it the right move for your business? Let's explore the benefits, challenges, and what you need to know before making this critical decision. Inconceivable! We're joined once again today by Mike Frater, President of On-Call Compliance Solutions and a CMMC Professional Assessor. Thanks for joining us, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman.
So, Mike, today we're talking about, as we mentioned, Azure Government. You recently released a video about this very topic on our YouTube channel, but this one is specifically for our mission compliance audience. So, with that being said, what are the key security and compliance benefits in moving your infrastructure to Azure Government compared to other cloud platforms?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. And I think, there's so much to unpack with this topic. I'm glad we're doing a podcast on it because um there's a lot of misinformation out there about, Azure Government and what it is and why it exists and things like that. Um, you know, it exists almost exclusively for the purpose of security and compliance. As our audience may or may not know, when you are trying to be NIST SP 800-171 compliant, NIST is derived out of the DFARS laws, generally speaking. I think NASA and Department of Homeland Security use it as well now. But a lot of the people who fall under this are defense contractors, and they have this need for heightened security. Office 365 Commercial is a global solution. Microsoft uses servers around the world to host the data, so it's not exclusively in the United States. And they also use global support, which means that it may not be Americans. In fact, it could be Russians, Chinese, or Iranian people who work for Microsoft who could potentially be supporting you depending upon what time of day it is. Again, they use what's called a follow the setting sun model of support. They're just such a big company that there's not really, I think, for them a whole lot of options or choice. So, why do people go to this solution? Well, they go to this solution for two reasons. One, because they're required to, if you're in government, the government partners with Microsoft on a very large scale to deliver Microsoft Office 365 and many other services. It's the de facto way that things get done. The second reason is because the government has its own compliance requirements it has to meet, and so therefore they had to work with Microsoft to design a custom environment in order to meet those requirements. And as such, there is a multitude of solutions. There's something called GCC, which is the Government Community Cloud. That still resides in the Azure Commercial Cloud, but it doesn't mandate that there's going to be all US support and all US hosting, generally speaking. So what happens there is it's compliant for government work. There are some limitations, but there's not all the limitations to meet compliance. And then, there's GCC High, which moves you into an exclusive US only data infrastructure. They're dedicated facilities or dedicated background checked American people, US persons. So, it is a different product, different solution. The good news is what's hosted there is more or less the same. Sometimes they're behind on feature updates by 6 months or so. Even that really is catching up and not as much the case anymore. But the point is, you buy into this solution because it is a guaranteed way to be compliant, more or less. And we love the solution because in a world of compliance where all our clients really want to do is check the box and make sure that they're doing the right thing and following the law, the easiest way to do that is to follow the example that the government and the DoD set, which is go use the same solutions they are. And I think that's the number one critical key difference in my mind between something like Office 365 GCC High and any other solution out there is that's the one the DoD is using. And because of that, there's zero fear in my mind of it not being the right solution. It's really hard to get in trouble when you're doing the same thing that the person who is auditing you is doing. Are there other solutions out there? Absolutely, right? AWS GovCloud exists. Um, in theory, AWS GovCloud should be just fine. And I think it probably is. Um, but again, government's not sitting there using, there's no Office 365 integration with AWS GovCloud. Maybe there's an integration, right? But it's not native. It's not Office 365 like you know, love, and trust. It's not the day-to-day applications that you already are using so that there's no end user training required when you switch over. It's just the right way and the easy way to do it. So, again, we're a CSP, which is a Microsoft Cloud Solution Provider. We've been an indirect reseller with Microsoft. We're now a direct reseller with Microsoft. We're a Microsoft partner. We just do a tremendous amount of work in concert with Microsoft for our clients already. And a lot of our clients have been coming to us with a pretty clear-cut challenge. It is, hey, look, I've got aging hardware, or I've got a company that's very difficult to make compliant because maybe they're doing some manufacturing and their whole ERP system needs to be compliant or whatever it may be. But they've got some unique scenario where compliance in their ordinary non-government work is not such an issue, but they now need to handle some special projects in this way. And at that point, you just kind of say, well, boy, it would be less expensive to just run these extra systems in a compliant environment. And why don't we just do that? As a matter of fact, it boils down to why wouldn't we do that? Right? If you knew that there was if you had a bar of gold, why wouldn't you put it in the vault as opposed to leaving it out on the table? It's almost like common sense to me. Um, again, you're required to be compliant. The government is required to be compliant. The government uses Microsoft, government solutions. Why wouldn't you? Is there extra cost? Good question. It is a little more expensive. It can run 15 to 30% more expensive on the licensing, depending upon the product, but it's really not that much more expensive. I find that in almost every company we work with, all of IT is under 1% of gross revenue. That's amazing. I mean, what a leverage point. What a leverage point that the technology that enables your company to exist will cost you less than 1% of gross revenue. I've always been in awe of that. So again, like the cost is really not significant in the big scheme of things. And it is kind of a bear to move, so I think the move over is something that we specialize in, because a lot of our clients in the past have really needed that. And we've become experts at migrating to Office 365 GCC High and experts at migrating, computers and servers over to the Azure Government environment. But yeah, again, to me, there's a difference between a real solution and a Band-Aid. And there's a lot of Band-Aids out there. There's a lot of email products out there who will say, hey, this is a CMMC compliant product, and it is, or DFARS and NIST compliant, et cetera. But that's just email, right? What happens when you need to store that data somewhere? What happens when you really need to natively use SharePoint? What happens when you need to now switch over and use AutoCAD? What happens when you have to use whatever specialized software your business uses? Um, those patchwork email solutions are good for like email and file storage sometimes, and they're not. A lot of them are really clunky too. Um, so I don't know. To me, the easy button is just use what the government uses, which is the exact same thing as what everybody else in the world uses. It's just housed in that compliant environment, has a lot of additional security protections as well. I don't know. Hopefully that answered that question. It's there's so much to unpack on the subject.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're on the right track for people to know what good this tool can do and what other tools are out there as well. But how can defense contractors determine whether Azure Government is the right solution for their cybersecurity needs?
That is the golden question. And I'll be honest with you, the easy way to figure that out is give us a call. I think at On Call we really excel at digging into a specific scenario. And I think one thing that we do that's so much different than other companies is, our our CMMC certified teams are not like on a silver mantle. I mean, they are as far as I'm concerned, but they're accessible. You can call us and get a free appointment and literally talk first phone call with technical experts on our team. That's really cool. Try doing that with other companies out there, and it's just never going to happen. They don't have enough experts on staff. Those experts are engaged in other projects. They're definitely not going to sit there on the initial marketing and sales front lines. And because this is all we do, we just simply have an abundance of those people in our company, and a culture that really proliferates an understanding of this stuff. And so we've got a much broader base of talent to pull from. And to me, I've always thought it's very important that if you're going to, have a company and sell something like, compliance, for instance, well, then the first person you ought to talk with is not a sales guy. You ought to talk with a compliance expert, right? You ought to get the answers that you're looking for. And then from there, we can actually figure out what is the right solution for you. So yeah, I'll give some general bullet points on how to figure that out. But the real reality is, if you're listening to this and you're kind of going, man, this sounds like the right thing for me, give us a call. It doesn't cost anything. There's no pressure to buy from us. We can literally kind of walk you through some basic low-level engineering of your solution and just help you figure out if we're headed in the right direction with an Azure Government enclave, or moving to GCC high, or standing up virtual servers and computers inside the Azure Government Cloud, where it's just sort of known and guaranteed to be compliant. So, the first thing that we will typically look at is, can we be compliant without it, right? So if you want to find out the answer to that, we just ask the opposite question, which is, if you've got a small 5-person business, it's easier to go secure 5 computers in most cases than it is to stand up a whole virtual enclave. And by the way, you don't necessarily have to stand up a lot of complexity in there. For instance, for under $1,000 a month, you could have 1 or 2 virtual computers that 5 to 8 users can use, and they just log in when they need to actually access and work with CUI, and then they log out when they're done. It's a really, really great scenario, right? They can still be non-compliant with their existing computers, but then they log into a compliant system, and it's the least amount of inconvenience that you could possibly have the users experience. They keep using the computers that they know, like, and trust. BYOD is no problem, right? They can have a bring your own device type of thing. No problem. When they cross over that secure perimeter, they're now secured by Azure Government and all of its mechanisms. So, gosh, what else can I tell you? What else do we look for? So first thing we do is we reverse engineer, and we figure out, is it possible for you to not be in this environment? And then we start talking about how your users utilize your systems every day. And we'll go through, typically Office 365 is a really easy one. If you're using Office 365, it's not compliant. If you're using Gmail, it's not compliant. They don't have guarantees. So usually a migration Office 365 GCC high is pretty common, honestly, for us. We do it all the time. We probably have 20, 30 migrations going on at any given time in our tech department, in our Azure Government department, and it's just kind of a normal thing. Again, I'll give you another great example. Google offers this thing called assured workloads, where you can get the data in the US, but there's concerns over, is it really US persons that are going to have access for support and things like that? And Google's notoriously difficult to work with on support. Again, Microsoft, they'll get you on the line with support in 30 seconds. We even have a support contract with Microsoft where, because we're contracted with them, they'll have somebody on the phone with us in like 5 minutes. You just can't get that kind of stuff out of Google. It's very difficult to get out of Amazon, is my understanding as well. I will admit, I don't have a really supreme level of familiarity with Amazon's products, because I've never seen a point in going over to them when Microsoft offers their government solutions and it's the same thing the government uses. Again, why would you reinvent the wheel? And maybe that's the number one reason to really do this. Why would you reinvent the wheel if there's already a perfectly acceptable way to do it that's literally pre-approved? It's done. Like, you don't have to think about this. And all of your users know it. They know the technology. They know Office 365. So, we kind of go through that rationale. We typically start with Office 365 and we look at that scenario. How are you doing email? Does it make sense to enclave? And then we start looking at, what is your use case? Are you doing, big graphical processing stuff like AutoCAD? AutoCAD's a great thing to bring into Azure Government. You can literally spin up and spin down resources dynamically in that environment. It's incredible. If you need it, you turn it on. If you don't need it, we turn off the machine. Boom. Only pay for the hours you're actually using it. That's really powerful. it's not unusual for someone to spend 20 to $30,000 on an AutoCAD workstation and server setup and storage and backup and all that stuff. It's not cheap. It's not cheap technology. Good news is it works really good, so that's kind of cool. It's cool to make things. Um, and so yeah, I mean, I think it's just, when you really start digging into it, you begin to look at, can they actually enclave? Can we isolate the defense work or aerospace work or whatever it is that's critical? Can we isolate that away from the rest of our system? Is that feasible? Um, is our CUI just simply some technical drawings that we get from time to time, and then whatever else we make off those drawings is not CUI? Those are questions we have to answer. So yeah, there's a lot of questions that we dive into. And then I think another one is, where are your people, right? If you've got a geographically diverse set of people, and maybe right now the company culture is bring your own device, very common. Standing up virtual workstations in Azure so that they can connect from any device and it gets secured by Microsoft. The data never leaves the Microsoft environment, all that good stuff. Um, boy, it's just one of those situations where it just makes complete and total sense to just move the workload to the cloud. And then finally, at a certain point, you begin moving the workload into the cloud and you start beginning to wonder to yourself, why don't I just move everything into the cloud? And that's kind of I would call that a very traditional, normal approach to how this works. It doesn't have to be done all at once. It can happen over time. And when you really begin to experience the beauty that is just not having to worry about that entire hardware layer, right? Because Microsoft takes care of it. And you begin to realize the beauty of um, just not even worrying about compliance anymore either, because Microsoft takes care of it. These guys have it figured out. They wrote the rules with the government. It's just any which way I put it, it's hard to not see it as an obvious choice. Um, and so I think that's it. If you've got an environment that can be made to be compliant without this, great, we're good. It's a terrific scenario. But when we don't have that environment, and it's not compliant, we start looking at the nickel and dime approach to trying to make it compliant. Sometimes it just is way easier to say, you know what, I'm going to stand up a new silo and stick all my defense stuff in it. And that's what Microsoft allows you to do with Azure Government.
Excellent. But something I was just thinking about while you were talking about AutoCAD and spinning up resources and stuff is that there was a section in the YouTube video where you talked about, you know, if you have subcontractors and spinning up virtual workstations for those subcontractors, and then when the work is done, winding those down. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Oh, again, like there's so many amazing use case scenarios for this. It is normal for, let's just say that you're, a traditional lab or a traditional, manufacturer. Like maybe you use 4 and 5 axis CNC machines and you have a ton of parts. You may have a need to show a subcontractor like a plating company or a painting company, or who knows what the other subcontractors are involved in taking what you machine and turning that into a finished product. Maybe even assembly people. Those may be outsourced people. They may be subcontractors. With the Azure Government Cloud, let's say you ran some virtual workstations, you can allow those subcontractors as authorized users of your system, right? And now you can just give them access to what they need within the Azure Government system. And it's incredible because they don't have to go over to your office anymore. You don't have to send them questionnaires about whether they're compliant, because they get to just simply be an authorized user on your system. It's interesting. I remember going through CMMC RP training, and they gave these scenarios, and I was a little surprised because we knew you could do it for compliance. We just didn't know they would so heavily advertise it. But this idea of having an infrastructure that can be shareable but still compliant, very, very powerful. So yeah, absolutely. If you're a prime, or if you are someone who is a larger company that subs out work, this is an amazing scenario, because otherwise you've got to let those outsiders inside of your on-premise network, and a lot of times that gets complicated. A lot of times you may just have to give them access to way too much, um, or you just generally don't want to. but the level of security controls that exist in modern day Azure Government and Office 365 GCC High are incredible. So it's really the perfect collaboration platform as well. You can even, I mean, you want to talk about the ease. You can, because it's all virtual, if you needed 10 computers right now, in the next 5 minutes, I mean, literally in seconds, you can spin up 10 new virtual computers, assign them to a sub network that's isolated, and basically invite subcontractors to only access that sub network, which has no access to anything else except what you give it. And you can just do it in minutes. It's just so incredible. So yeah, I agree. It's a huge advantage for subcontractors. That's a really good catch out of that video.
Yeah, absolutely. But so obviously this is a good tool. Azure's a good place to take all of your servers and everything if you because it's already a compliant environment. But what, if any, are the cost considerations when transitioning to Azure Government for defense contractors?
Great question. And what I'll share with you is that there is a mindset shift, and I think it's already mostly made, but there's a mindset shift. Small business owners want to own everything outright, right? They're very proud of this. They pay everything off. They, whatever. And so they don't want to let go of the concept of being able to buy a computer and be done with it, right? Buy it from Best Buy, buy it from Dell, pay $1,000, boom, your computer's there, and that's it. That's all you got to pay. The problem with that is that's not the real story. The real story is you bought a computer for $1,000. You got 3 good usable years out of it. 3 good usable years. That's a tongue twister. And then at the end of the third year, you realize, man, this thing is actually really slow. And you get less and less utility out of it. And then you always have to replace it. It just don't last that long, right? Maybe you get 4 years out of it and you're really lucky, which means that computer per se may have cost you $250 per year, but it's inevitable it's getting replaced. And so, again, a lot of old school business people focus in on, what they call CapEx expenses, expenses they can write down, expenses that are one time. But the challenge with that is that doesn't take into account the reality, which is a business produces cash flow. It doesn't produce a one-time chunk of money. And so when you consider that IT overall is 1% of gross revenue in an average company, it makes all the sense in the world to stop the difficulty associated with that hardware layer that you've got to always continuously replace and swap it into something like an Azure virtual infrastructure where Microsoft's constantly upgrading this thing. It keeps getting cheaper and it keeps getting better and faster. You don't ever have to deal with the disruption if you don't want to of the hardware layer being upgraded, which is it's a big distraction, especially on servers. It's a nightmare. You got one-touch upgrades. You take an image, you take a snapshot, and you restore it to something that's got more resources. I mean, it's like it takes seconds. So I think there's so many advantages to virtualizing computers. I mean, here's another one, right? You can access it from anywhere, right? So you set up your rules. Like for instance, maybe you only want it to be accessible from the United States. You set up your rules on access, and then you can get at it from whatever devices you authorize. You can either use Intune to lock out other devices, or you can leave it open. But there's so many advantages that we begin to look at it. And since it's not really a CapEx expense, right? It's not really a one-time expense ever because you're always going to have to rebuy a new one. It just makes so much sense to go back and just pay for it as you're using it instead of that one-time big capital outlay of $1,000. Just pay 50, $100 a month per workstation. Just makes more sense. And then you're always going to have a new fresh workstation. So you pay a little extra, but the reality is you're really not paying a whole lot extra. You're in fact gaining some serious advantage in efficiency and scalability, right? If you decide that you want that thing to be faster, you just go to the control panel, upsize the machine, and Bob's your uncle. You're good to go. So yeah, so I think from an expense perspective, certainly someone's got to manage it. I think On-Call's got a really amazing strategy for managing it. It's very cost effective to have us manage your infrastructure for you. From securing it, it's awesome. It's brilliant. The infrastructure itself is just simply more secure. I don't know, you're sitting literally alongside basically DoD machines. So I don't believe the security is going to get any better than this. And they're constantly monitoring their environment for threats. So you've kind of got some extra eyeballs on your security side. So yeah, I don't know. The cost to me, given the overall cost of technology in most businesses, it's just really insignificant. Now here's the best part though. The best part that I love is that if you know how to do it, you can potentially get paid back for this infrastructure, right? You factor that as a part of your cost in the contract proposal, and more or less get the government to pay for it. I can't guarantee that all the time works, but a lot of times it does. And sometimes you have to go up on your prices, right? It costs more money to run a business that has these requirements. Defense contractors shouldn't eat that expense. They should really be focused in on making sure that expense is properly allocated to what caused it. So I don't know, Roman. It's for me, it's an interesting conversation. We teach our clients how to grow through compliance. And certainly you're going to have to spend a couple of bucks getting compliant. And you might even have to spend a couple more dollars a month, moving things to Azure Government. But then when you can market yourself as a compliant and secure company, you're just simply eligible to win more work, right? You go back to your current customers. You say, "Hey, we got with this. We got it. Like, can you send us more work?" And they will find a way. Very rarely does someone make that ask and they don't find a way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Bob's your uncle. Good old Uncle Bob. Anyway, we those are our main three questions. You know the drill here. If you're a longtime listener of this podcast, we ask the pertinent questions, and then we like to finish by having a little bit of fun. But Mike is always very, very good at taking our silly question that ends the podcast and making it into something that maybe it wasn't even intended to be. Maybe we asked those questions to trip Mike up or to just be ridiculous for no reason at all. But Mike manages to make them relevant, so here we go. If your server could speak, what do you think it would say about moving to the cloud?
Think you would say I'm scared. You know, you ever see that show Star Trek?
Yep. Yes, I have.
I think for IT directors, it's a scary notion to take an on-premise server and move it to the cloud. A lot of them are scared because they don't know about it. They've never done it before. They have, no pun intended, but some performance anxiety, right? How will it perform? And I think what I can tell our audience is no worries. It will be fine. Um, Number one is Microsoft makes uh, migration software that will allow you to literally pack up your server into a virtual image, shoot it up to Azure Government, and then redeploy it as a virtual image. And then, as far as backup's concerned, there's so many different ways to back up, but you can right there in Microsoft create a scheduled snapshot every day or every hour if you really want for that machine to make sure it's got proper backup and it's resourced. Um, I'm not going to tell you it's like the easiest process if you've never done it before, but if you've done several hundred servers like we have, it's really easy. And I think that the answer is I think a server would say, I'm ready to go. I mean, I can hang out here on premise in a dusty room where the conditions are typically not ideal. Um, or I can go to a data center and party with all my friends in a nice, cool environment that's dust free and just meant for me. Where I'll live longer, where I'll have better health, where I'll have clean, dedicated power and internet, and where I'll really be able to be optimal, like an athlete. So yeah, I guess the reality is like anybody making this move, I think a server would probably be cautiously optimistic, maybe a little bit anxious. But at the end of the day, when they get there, it's going to be a better life for them, you know?
I don't know why this equivalency popped in my head, and maybe it's absolute nonsense. But when you were talking about, if the servers wanting to do it and party with its friends, I was thinking it's kind of equivalent to like sending your child to like a boarding school where it's like it may seem difficult and because you won't know like it won't the child won't be right there with you all the time like an on-premise server would physically be there for you to look at. but it would be around the child would be around other children its own age and have a lot of one-on-one time with peers. Now, I don't know why that was the comparison that popped in my head, but it's like sending your child to a boarding school.
That's it, man. A lot it's a mix too because we see kind of old school IT people and new school IT people. New school IT people don't want any responsibility for anything. I would tell you I'm probably in that camp, right? Like we don't run physical servers at on-call. Everything that's really critical is in the Azure Government Cloud. We drink our own Kool-Aid in that regard. And I just don't want anything on premise. I mean, for one thing, we're a distributed company. We have employees all over the country. We have offices in three different locations, and none of them are really centralized. I mean, we technically have a headquarters in Tallahassee, Florida, but it's not really where a lot of the business goes on, as you can imagine. So, I think for new school people, it just makes sense. For some of the old school people, they want the racks and the bare metal sitting right there in their office, or they want to be able to put hands on the servers, in a locked cage that's theirs. And I think I don't think there's a right or wrong. But I certainly think one of them is easier. And I think to me, the easier thing is to basically use it pay for it as you use it or pay as you go, as Microsoft likes to say. That to me has always been a smarter model. And I think it's cool that that's how they've chosen to run their cloud. And gosh, what else can I really say? I think it's just a matter of um, what's easier? To me, there's just nothing easier than saying, I'm going to go take this network or this application, and I'm going to go put it into a secure, compliant government place where I know it'll be okay, where I know it's going to find home.
Absolutely. And that wraps up another great episode of Mission Compliance. We hope our discussion today has provided you with valuable insights, practical strategies, and inspiration to navigate the ever-evolving world of defense. We'd like to thank Mike for joining us and talking about the very important topic of bringing your servers to Azure Government. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, always a pleasure, Roman.
But the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics and connect with us via our social media channels. Share your thoughts, ask questions, and engage with fellow listeners using the hashtag Mission Compliance Podcast. If they haven't already, what should they do, Mike?
Well, sir, they should like, subscribe, and definitely, you know what, especially if you're on YouTube, smash that subscribe button. I think we recently passed more than 2 million views. I don't even know how many we have today, but it's growing like wildfire. And it's a great place to get all of your critical information.
And for those, it just occurred to me that I've been reading the same outro for 60 something episodes now, and we've never explicitly stated that YouTube channel is On-Call Compliance Solutions. It's not, Mission Compliance is part of On-Call Compliance Solutions. We don't have a separate YouTube channel for the podcast. So On-Call Compliance Solutions is that YouTube channel. But like Mike said, smash that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you know when new episodes like this one are released. We truly appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate and review the show. Your feedback helps us to continue to bring you thought-provoking episodes and high-quality content. Join us next time as we delve further into the dynamic world of defense, security, and industry innovation. Until then, take care, stay informed, and make compliance your mission. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.